Okay, for this presentation, we're going to go backwards in time from where Rich was. For men and women of a certain age, and I see a bunch in this room, baseball cards were the way we learned about the game. I collected cards passionately as a kid, and I studied their backs. The content of those cards was to many our education in baseball. Since the cards express what manufacturers regard as significant about baseball, they can play an important part in writing or rewriting history. Baseball cards are also meaningful because a society's objects reflect its beliefs. Cards illustrate cultural values, they convey symbolic messages, and sometimes from the players themselves. The way in which society has issued and valued Negro League cards over time has mirrored its perception of its ball players. I will sometimes be discussing pricing because how the marketplace values an item represents the importance that we as a people place on it. Okay, let's get to it. The earliest cards featuring African-American players can be found on those of integrated teams. One of the first is Frank Grant's image on the 1887 Buffalo team cabinet card. Nearly all of the players touch each other with a brotherly hand on the arm or shoulder of a teammate. Only Grant sits alone, neither touching nor touched by any teammates. Grant was also with the team in 1888, but his teammates refused to sit with him at all that year. Another telling card is that with Moses Fleetwood Walker on the 1888 Syracuse Stars. This was a year after Cap Anson had compelled the International Association to agree not to sign any more Black players. At the age of 31, Walker was the Stars' frontline catcher and helped them to the pennant. He returned to Syracuse for the 1889 season, and his baseball career ended when he was released on August 23rd. While most of the team looks straight at the camera, Walker stands at the end of the last row, arms folded, looking away. Is this his way of signaling that he feels apart from the team? A pattern one sees repeated over and over in these old cabinet cards can be seen on this 1894 Finley team cabinet card featuring Bud Fowler and Grant Johnson. The Black players on these cards are virtually always at the end of the row. More evidence that these players were part of the team, but not wholly. In 1896, a trade card of the Page Fence Giants was issued, featuring Grant Home Run Johnson, George Wilson, and Charlie Grant. The Page Fence Giants were an African-American team based in Adrian, Michigan. This card is the only one known to feature an all-Black team in the 19th century. Many collectors consider this to be the first true Negro League baseball card. Less than 10 of these cards are known today and would run you from $5,000 to $14,000, depending upon condition. The first baseball cards of Negro League players as tobacco premiums were issued in Cuba in 1909 and 1910. Cabanas and Punch Cigars produced cards of Pete Hill, Grant Johnson, Pop Lloyd, and Jose Mendez. Only a few copies of these cards are known to exist. What is noteworthy about these cards is that they were issued in Cuba, where the players were venerated, with no cards of individual Negro Leaguers issued at this time in the US. In the early 20th century, cabinet cards and postcards of leading Black teams began to be distributed in the United States. Here are just a few. The 1909 Leland Giants with Rube Foster and Pete Hill. The 1913 All Nations team with John Donaldson and Jose Mendez. And the 1914 Lincoln Giants with Joe Williams, Dick Redding, Louis Santop, and Spot Poles. Cards such as these come to market these days only at auction. In 1916, there was one card of a professional Black ball player that slipped out in the US. Claimed by his team to be an Indian, Jimmy Claxton was a 23-year-old pitcher who landed with Pacific Coast League's Oakland Oaks. While Claxton's tenure with the Oaks lasted only a week before they threw him off the team, he was immortalized on the Z-Nuts card when the photographer happened to show up that week. Only 9 copies of this card have turned up to date, and they sell between $5,000 and $25,000, depending upon condition. One of the 9 copies can actually be found on the 3rd floor of the Hall of Fame, where they have an exhibit of the 10 most iconic baseball cards in history. This card made it. In the 1920s, again in Cuba, cards of leading Negro leaguers, including Oscar Charleston, Cristobal Torriente, and Pop Lloyd, were issued as tobacco premiums in sets depicting up to 80 players. These cards, of which less than 20 each are currently known, achieve high premiums because the earliest are regarded by collectors as the rookie or first cards of these players. I'm going to focus for a minute on the 1924 Cuban Aguilitas card of Oscar Charleston. In 2011, this card sold for $8,000. Sounds like a lot of money. In 2022, the same Oscar Charleston card, the very same card, was resold for $132,000. It's hard to escape the conclusion that this card only rose in value because we as a society now value the Negro Leagues as significant. The true shame of baseball card history is that the Negro Leagues were so neglected in this country during their peak. There was a remarkable exception which occurred in one place in the South where racial differences were slightly less pronounced. Hot Springs, Arkansas was an early spring training site where white and black major league teams trained side by side. Starting in 1930, Harrison Studios issued a series of postcards over a 3-year period of the Homestead Grays and the Pittsburgh Crawfords, fortuitously catching 2 of the greatest Negro League teams at their heights of fame. To date, 11 different cards from the set have been uncovered. This 1930 Harrison Studios card of the Homestead Grays features 4 Hall of Famers: Oscar Charleston, Judy Johnson, Smokey Joe Williams, and Cum Posey, as well as future Hall of Famers George Scales and Vic Harris. In 1931, Harrison Studios issued individual cards of the players, including the first card of Josh Gibson. The Gibson card, which was found in the estate of a fellow Negro League player, is autographed by Josh Gibson both on the front and back. It is the only copy of this card known. It features Gibson in his rookie year. He joined the team in the late summer of 1930, but this was his first full year. And it is the only autographed full-body image of Gibson known to exist. It achieved the highest price ever paid for an American postcard when it sold at auction for $81,000 back in 2017. The card is referred to in the hobby as the Holy Grail of Negro League baseball cards. I consider this card to be the most important Negro League baseball card in existence. In 1932, Harrison Studios issued a postcard of the Pittsburgh Crawfords, featuring the first image of Satchel Paige on an American card standing next to Gibson. A truly unique card was also issued by Harrison Studios that year of Crawford's owner Gus Greenlee, together with his bookmaker partner Woogie Harris and their wives. I love this card, even though my spell checker keeps trying to reject the name Woogie. Through the 1940s, Cuba, Puerto Rico, Mexico, and the Dominican Republic all produced baseball cards of Negro League players. Some of the more fascinating cards were produced in Mexico, where the Negro League players were far better paid and better respected than in this country. Here's a 1942 Mexican card of Monty Irvin and Ray Dandridge in their best attire, standing in front of a palm tree, clearly enjoying themselves. My favorite sets of this era were issued by Toleteros in Puerto Rico each winter season from 1948-49 to 1950-51. The most collectible of these, as Rich pointed out, is the 50-51 card of Josh Gibson, which is often mistakenly referred to as his rookie card. In fact, this is a tribute card issued years after his death. As less than 35 copies of the Gibson Toleteros have surfaced to date, it's been called the Honus Wagner of Negro League cards. To demonstrate the increasing importance of Negro League cards, this card sold in 2011 for $11,500, and the exact card was resold in 2021 for $104,000. It's a tenfold increase. Cards of the Negro Leagues virtually disappeared for a time after the leagues faded to minor league status in the early 1950s. The major exception was a card created in 1952 by the Indianapolis Clowns of their teenage infielder, Henry Aaron, his first baseball card. Aaron played only 14 games for the Clowns before his contract was sold to Milwaukee. This card is so rare that I've never seen one come to market. Following Jackie Robinson's debut with the Dodgers in 1947, cards of former Negro Leaguers began to be issued by major American manufacturers. The most important of these is Satchel Paige's short-printed 1949 Leaf card, which is now regarded as the rarest and most significant post-war baseball card. In 2012, you could pick up a decent copy for over $2,000. Now a beat-up copy will start at $20,000, and a near-mint copy of this card sold in 2018 for $432,000. What is even more significant about this period than the prices is how Topps, which dominated the baseball card market in the 1950s, chose to ignore or disparage the Negro League past. Historian Robert Fitz, some of whose observations I include in this talk, conducted a study of baseball cards in the early 1950s, which showed that 90% of the cards of non-Negro League players with less than 5 years experience discussed their minor league history. For former Negro League players, only 10% refer to their Negro League background. Where they do, the cards refer to the Negro Leagues as semi-pro or unorganized instead of the professional leagues they were. The card of former Negro Leaguer Johnny Wyatt states for the line 1955, out of organized baseball. In fact, Wyatt played for the Kansas City Monarchs in 1955. The card of Harry Suitcase Simpson states in 1949, the Indians bought him from the Philadelphia Stars of semi-pro fame. The Philadelphia Stars, as everyone here knows, were a fully professional Negro League team for over 16 years. Bob Trice's 1954 card contains a comic strip picture on the back showing him batting for the Homestead Grays with a white catcher crouching behind him. The comic effectively masks the fact that the Grays were a Negro League team. Monty Irvin's 1953 card states, the former Lincoln University star has been in organized baseball since 1949. Nothing about his 8 years in the Negro Leagues, which led to the Hall of Fame. The earliest card of Larry Doby was issued by Exhibit in 1947. It's a photo of him in his Negro League uniform, but with all Newark Eagles insignias airbrushed out, effectively erasing history. Luke Easter's 1954 Topps card just made stuff up to explain how he became such a star so quickly in the American League. Quote, Luke was one of the country's best softball players. Luke never played baseball until 1946, exclamation point. In fact, Easter never played softball, but he played industrial and Negro League ball as far back as 1937. Buck O'Neill ranked him right behind Buck Leonard as the second best first baseman in Negro League history. Then there's Hank Aaron's 1956 Topps card. It features a color photo of Aaron with a second image of him with a big Milwaukee M on his hat as he slides across home plate. Except that if you look closely at the face of the player sliding across the plate, it's not Aaron, it's Willie Mays. I guess to Topps they looked alike and they figured nobody would notice. In 1963, Gad Fun issued a series of comic baseball cards, which included the first regular baseball card of Moses Fleetwood Walker, and correctly identified him rather than Jackie Robinson as the first Black professional in the traditional major leagues. As such, the hobby deems it to be his rookie card, but the card itself is a travesty. It depicts racially insensitive caricatures of Walker and his brother Weldy, which could have been drawn in the mid-1800s, eating watermelon as they play the field. All of these cards demonstrate that while baseball was now desegregated and the Negro Leagues were no longer of economic importance, the card companies continued to denigrate the former Negro Leagues and its players by omission and outright prejudice. That baseball cards were considered as children's toys allowed them to escape attention as ideologically charged items. By ignoring the contribution of Negro League ball, They implied that black ball was inferior and were rewriting history to give the impression that African Americans played little role in the development of baseball. The baseball cards of the 1950s and 1960s therefore actively participated in relegating the Negro Leagues to historical obscurity. It wasn't until the 1970s that this prejudice began to be reversed as independent manufacturers began to produce sets of Negro League cards, beginning with the Laughlin set, which was just presented. To date, there have been dozens of Negro League sets issued by independent companies and as promotions by companies like McDonald's and Kraft. What is particularly noteworthy about the Negro League sets of the 1970s is that many of the players were still alive and available to autograph their cards. However, only 9 Negro League Hall of Famers survived until this era. Premiums paid for baseball cards autographed by Hall of Famers range from a Monty Irvin card signed at $20 to a Satchel Paige at $1,000. As virtually all the players have now passed, cards autographed by Negro League veterans are probably among the hobby's best investments. In the 1990s, the Negro League Baseball Players Association distributed 2 sets of 30 cards each, which were produced by Ron Lewis artists. As all of the players on these sets were alive at the time, the cards, which were often used by collectors for obtaining autographs. It is almost impossible to find the Clyde McNeil card, as he died shortly after the set was issued. His family took to using a rubber stamp for collectors who saw his signature. It took me years to complete the actual autographs for my entire set. My favorite recent set was released in 2020 by Dreams Fulfilled. It's a truly beautiful 184 card set, which was commissioned as part of the 100th anniversary of the founding of the Negro National League. Beginning in the 1990s, the major card companies finally stopped ignoring the Negro Leagues by issuing tribute cards. What's significant about these cards is that companies such as Topps are paying the estates of the players for the use of their images. Many of these cards include the player's signature or a piece of the player's game-used equipment embedded in the card to make them special to collectors. Here's one example with Mule Suttles, Cool Papa Bell, and Roy Campanella. But the most sought after of these cards are any of Josh Gibson. Since Gibson died before the advent of the autograph era, his signature is quite rare and valuable. There have even been 2 baseball cards which have had a signature of Gibson embedded in the card. One sold in 2003 for $12,500 and resold in 2021 for $97,000. Gibson's game-used equipment is virtually non-existent. In 2005, Gibson's family sold a game-used bat in its possession to Topps for an undisclosed sum. It was one of only 2 Josh Gibson game-used bats known to exist. Each year since then, Topps has issued a handful of cards containing a small slice of the bat embedded in the card. Topps even offered a one-of-a-kind card incorporating the Gibson nameplate from the bat barrel. Many people in the hobby felt that it was improper for such an important object to be chopped up in this manner, but Gibson's family certainly had the right to make that decision. In any event, these cards often sell for over $1,000 each. However, don't assume that Negro League cards are all pricey. More than 300 cards of Cool Papa Bell and over 1,200 cards of Satchel Paige have been issued since 1974. Many of these cards are available for $1 or $2. And it's not simply the Hall of Famers. Almost every major leaguer has had at least a few cards issued. Artie Wilson was a shortstop who achieved a cup of coffee with the New York Giants in 1951 and was never included in any major company release. I've still collected almost 40 different cards of Wilson, many from his time in Puerto Rico in the Pacific Coast League, and none costing more than $25. Let me close on a brief note of Negro League memorabilia other than cards. Much of it is extremely rare and difficult to verify. Negro Leaguers had no reason to consider the game-related items as anything special, so what has survived tends to be quite unique. Here are some auction results. Josh Gibson's game-used bat, this was the other one, sold at Christie's in 2016 for $319,000. This is a copy of me holding the bat. I didn't buy it. I couldn't afford that. But I did go to the exhibit and I asked if I could hold it. and the attendant let me hold on to it. Now, I got to tell you, it was really exciting. Physically, you get a reaction holding an item like that. It's sort of like when Indiana Jones approached the Holy Grail. But right after this picture was taken, the curator happened to walk by and ran in the room screaming, "No, no, no, no one's allowed to touch that bat." So went back in the case, and I think I was the only one to touch it, other than whoever bought it. A Rube Foster signed letter with baseball content, sold in 2016 for $15,000. Similar letter sold in 2024 for $41,000. Josh Gibson's 1941 Puerto Rico contract. I don't know if you can read it from out there, but it's an amazing document. It calls for a salary of $25 a week, no per diem, and round-trip transportation to Puerto Rico. The contract itself sold at auction for $96,000. Josh Gibson and Satchel Paige signed baseball, sold in 2004 for $4,800, resold in 2022 for $42,000. As the Negro League's greatest players begin to become household names, hobbyists and investors have become aware of the extreme rarity and historical significance of these players' collectibles. In fact, no segment of the baseball card market has increased in value over the past decade as much as that of Negro League stars. The integration of Negro League statistics into those of the major leagues should only accelerate this trend. I don't know where the market will go, but I do know that there are about 40 known copies of the Honus Wagner T206 card, and none sell for less than $1 million. There are over 2,000 graded copies of the 1952 Topps Mickey Mantle card, and a high-graded copy sold last year for over $12 million. There's only one known copy of the 1931 rookie card of Josh Gibson, and only 13 known copies of the 1923 rookie card of Oscar Charleston, perhaps the Negro League's greatest player. I'll let you do the math. Thank you. Questions?
How much does the grading of cards and things that it's become very popular, how big of an effect do you think that has on the drastic rise of some of these prices?
Almost none on Negro League items. They're so rare that none of them would grade above like PSA 1 or 2, which is the lowest grade, but they still sell for crazy premiums because they're so rare.
What do you think that Topps in particular should do to make up for its sins of the past?
Well, to a certain extent, I think they are doing it because they are making a lot of tribute cards these days, and they are paying the estates of the players, which I'm sure, for example, in Laughlin, I'm sure the estates of the players did not get paid. So Topps and Panini, the major companies, are doing it correctly because they have to follow the law.
Just noticed on the autograph baseball, Satchel Paige is spelled with 2 L's at the end. Is that accurate? Or?
I have it was certified as his autograph, so I have no idea.
What's that?
It was when it sold at auction, it was certified by PSA as an authentic autograph. I wonder if he spelled his name differently. I don't know. Any other questions?
Yeah, I was curious. When does a postcard become a baseball card?
You know, Negro League cards are so rare that collectors generally consider anything that's either a cabinet card, a postcard that was issued in multiples, or a traditional baseball card as a baseball card. All three are deemed by collectors to be cards. Any other questions?
Cards have emotional value in your collection. Which is the card that you value most emotionally?
Well, I've been a collector for about 20 years now of the Negro League cards, and I love them all. You know, it's hard to say. You know, I do have some of the Harrison Studios cards, and I love those because they're really rare, and I think, you know, those are the greatest teams, I think, of Negro League history. Any other questions?
So in 2020, when a lot of Negro League, several Negro League players were again recognized a surge in interest in Negro League cards, and do you think it'll happen again now that MLB just made some recent announcements about the integration of Negro League stats into MLB?
I say yes and yes. The market in top level Negro League cards has basically gone up 10 times in the last 10 years. And I think the integration of statistics can only help that. You know, people are really recognizing these players for the great players they were. And, you know, when everyone knows about the Topps Mickey Mantle card, 1952 Mickey Mantle card, but there are, over 2,000 copies of that out there. These cards, the old Cuban cards of Oscar Charleston, they're less than 20 available. I think that, the market is going to go up.
Do Negro League players have contracts with Flourish and Raspberry, Louisville Slugger, that company?
The bats that have come to market, most of them have come directly from Louisville Slugger, where the players would send in the bats to be duplicated, and Louisville Slugger would, keep a copy. And those are the bats that have showed up. The Josh Gibson bat, which sold at auction for $360, was from Louisville. They had kept those bats. So whether they had contracts, I don't know, but that's where they would send their bats to be copied.
Did you say only 9 of the Jimmy Claxton cards?
Correct.
Make it 10.
Okay. Is yours graded or not?
No,
Okay, then there's
No,
another one out there.
I got it in a batch of PCL cards.
You should definitely have it graded.
All right.
I know in the early '80s, when Cuba opened up, a lot of people were going down to Cuba trying to find these cards and making deals and getting cards for dirt cheap and then bringing them back. Is that still going on?
I don't know the answer to that. I don't know the answer. I would think most of the cards that are available are out in the world by now because everybody knows about these prices. Am I done?
One more question.
One more question. Go ahead.
The exhibit cards, you said that, the Larry Doby card didn't have the logo on it or anything like that. Some of the white players from that time also don't have that, but some of the teams do. Do you know if that's like a team copyright kind of a thing?
I don't know if the Newark Eagles were enforcing their copyright that vigorously back in those days. So I doubt that was a copyright thing, but I don't know. Okay, thank you very much.